everyone, how's it going? Wanted to do something a little bit different with this video compared to some other ones that I've done in the past. I wanted to just switch it up a little bit, not deviating away at all in any capacity from any of the content that has been showcased out in the past, just simply trying out something new. We're going to take a look at a potential scenario where if the Fallout universe or Falloutlore, basically if you played the Fallout games, if that particular scenario were to come to fruition in real life, what would that look like? And we'll be taking a look at basically the different canon that is involved in the Fallout universe and look at how it could potentially translate into real life, covering things like the fictional Sino-US war and basically what led up to the bombs dropping and what is basically left after all is said and done, and looking over the course, again using the Fallout universe as basically a map. So without further ado, I'll stop talking and we'll get right into it. Before we look at the aftermath of what an America would look like after a Fallout-like event, we first have to look back into the Fallout lore and look at what exactly led up to the bombs falling. To do this, I am pulling from the Fallout wiki, so for those die-hard Fallout fans out there, do not shoot the messenger. I am just the messenger. This is coming from the official falloutfandom.com wiki. So let's just dive into the background there so that we can better understand why the bombs fell in the first place and see how it could relate to what's maybe going on in our current reality. The Sino-American War was a war involving the People's Republic of China and the United States as two superpowers clashed in a struggle to control the last remaining resources on Earth. The two key participants and their client states and annexed nations engaged in total war against each other, as both civilian and military resources were harnessed to achieve victory over the other side, in a struggle that was as much about resources as it was about ideology. So in a sense, it was basically a power struggle over not really so much ideologies or political ideologies like maybe that we have going on today, but it was more so about the lack there of resources. So water, probably food in some cases. It could be energy. Energy in the Fallout universe, they talk a lot about fusion and fusion-powered cars, military equipment, engines, and infrastructure, essentially. So it could be that as well. So it's more about the lack thereof resources. And honestly, looking at our current reality, you could even draw a line in comparison saying that even though today it's not really so much we're in a pinch for resources, but the ideologies and the things like that are there very prevalently in our, modern day society. But in the coming years, who knows? Maybe this could be a dystopian view of how that could actually come to fruition. But continuing on here, the war was marked by atrocities on both sides, both against foreign and domestic populations, steady escalations of hostility, up to and including the use of nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons, and the gradual transition of both states into totalitarian dictatorships, no different from one another. So that's another interesting point as well. It's basically saying that China, or the People's Republic of China, has a totalitarian dictatorship, which kind of, in the way today, it's not really too far off. But it's also saying on the flip side of that, that the United States is also in a very much a totalitarian state. That's another interesting point to point out there regarding the comparisons, maybe, of how that could come to be. In the Fallout universe, there is a lot that delves into the I would say, capitalist systems that are going in play. Like you have Mr. House in charge of Robco. You have Vault Tech that's making the vaults. So you have a few different corporate entities that are looking in some way or form, looking to reshape the power in society. And in some way, you could also say that's not necessarily happening today, but there is concerns today that many people do have, that there are concerns of the United States turning into what is called an oligarchy. And if you're not familiar, an oligarchy is essentially a political system, really more of a system rather, not really political, but a system is essentially ran by corporate entities. So the private sector basically controls policy, politics, the economy, things like that. They're the driving force behind a nation's movements, essentially. So that's an interesting comparison that they make there. Back to the Sino-American War, though. Resource shortages made this a war of position rather than maneuver. Trench warfare was common, particularly in Alaska, until new models of the power armor were introduced into the fray by the United States forces. Stalemates were extremely common. The Sino-American War, culminating in what is called the Great War, was the most destructive war in human history, resulting in unprecedented casualties amongst soldiers and civilians alike. Due to the deployment of nuclear weapons on a global scale, the Sino-American War can be therefore understood as the war that ended the quote-unquote old world. So that's the backstory of how the bombs came to fall in the first place. Now, of course, there is much more in-depth analyses and explanations as to kind of the strings that were being pulled behind the scenes. I know the new Fallout TV show kind of hints at that, and they actually, I don't want to say without spoiling, of course, for anybody that hasn't seen it, but they kind of go into that route a little bit more and kind of build on some of the additional canon that was already in the game, and in some way kind of answer questions, but then also leave some other questions to be answered. Back on track, though. So the bombs fall, and we are then fast forwarded. You know, usually in the games they fast forward you maybe about like 100 or 200 years later. And if we're looking at the map here, we will go through. We're not going to go through all of them. I found a very detailed, through my research, I found very detailed maps that illustrate even some of the most minor and very few clans and groups and factions that exist within the Fallout universe. We're not going to go through all of them. Right now, we're just going to focus more on the main ones, the bigger ones that exist within the continental United States. We're not going to be covering the whole world. We're just, for this video, going to be focusing on the United States as it will allow us to fictionally look at a potential future within the Fallout universe, using the Fallout canon, the lore, as a means to look at what a potential nuclear Armageddon might look like in the United States. So, starting from left to the right, we're going to start with the probably the most notable, and the one that is definitely in many of the previous titles, the NCR, otherwise known as the New California Republic. Basically stretches all the way from kind of like the bottom of Oregon and stretches pretty much throughout all of California, and even into some regions in Baja California, and in some regions into Mexico. And then, of course, they also have territory within kind of like the southern corner of Nevada, or what once was Nevada, as that is also where, if you play New Vegas, it makes sense, because the NCR controls kind of the area that's around New Vegas. So their presence is definitely heavily involved in there. The NCR is, essentially, to summarize them, they're a group of individuals that formed with the idea of sticking to older world values and older customs, and the way I would describe them in my experience playing the games, and from what I understand from the stories as well, they're basically almost like ex-military in a way, but they're a bit more loose. They're not really so strict as maybe some other factions in the game are. Like I said, they focus on old world values, so they have their own currency. They have their own cities that they run, their own cities that they govern. And it's kind of, it's almost in a way like they're trying to put freedom back into the wasteland in a way. At least that is part of it. There also is another large part of the NCR that is very much corrupt, and in many different ways they're corrupt. I won't go into great detail there, but that's the NCR. So the NCR basically controls a good chunk of the West Coast. After that, going slightly to the right, we then have the infamous Caesar's Legion. Now, the Caesar's Legion was formed out of many different clans within kind of like the southwest of the United States, and they're essentially what you would expect after hearing their name. They have adopted almost a Roman imperial mentality, philosophy, and ideology when it comes to governing their state. They are run by Caesar himself, and they basically go all out as far as what the Romans used to do. So they participate in crucifixions, they participate in ruthless methods of torture, but they're also pretty well organized in the art of warfare and organization. And I would say that the NCR and Caesar's Legion have definitely on more than one occasion butt heads many times, particularly over the Hoover Dam if you played New Vegas. And that is basically one of the largest entities that survives the nuclear holocaust. And depending on which side of the aisle you float on, as far as if you like the Legion or you don't, they are probably one of the most dangerous ones too. So after Caesar's Legion, we're kind of a little bit all over the place after Caesar's Legion. So the next one that's up is also the well-known Brotherhood of Steel. Now, the Brotherhood of Steel, as you can see from the map, they are in different parts of the United States. Now, you might be wondering, why are they spread out like this across the United States? Why aren't they just in one central location like the NCR or Caesar's Legion? Well, if you have played the games, you'll understand that the Brotherhood of Steel, basically their whole mantra is they are looking to salvage, collect, and use pre-war tech for their purposes. Basically, they see themselves as mankind's saviors, and they want to essentially help basically society as it exists above the nuclear wasteland continue to thrive. And the way that they see themselves doing that is by adopting almost a cult-like mentality when it comes to collecting, maintaining, and using pre-war technology. So the power armor suits, the helicopter birds that they use, the big airships that they've used. If you've played Fallout 4, one of the airships in there named the Predwin, they use things like that. So they have means of basically getting around with ease, essentially, mostly by air, I would say, more than anything. But it makes sense why they're all kind of spread out about, because to them, they're able to do that. They're not confined to just simply walking, necessarily. The other thing, too, is that within the Brotherhood, there's also different chapters within the Brotherhood. So there are some, if you played some of the games, there are some particular Brotherhood groups that maybe don't necessarily tie in completely to the standard Brotherhood mantra, essentially, and they kind of go off and do their own thing. So even within the overall arching group of the Brotherhood, there is like separate entities that operate kind of on their own accord, if that makes sense. So that's the Brotherhood. They're kind of spread out. They're a little all over the place. Right above the Gulf of Mexico, in what was Louisiana and Alabama, we also then have the Republic of Kanjun. The Republic of Kanjun encompasses much of the Gulf. It's not really known what their philosophy is. From my research, I wasn't able to dig up a ton on them. They haven't really been mentioned too much in the game. Not much is really known about them, but from what we can see on the map, they do control a very large part of southern portion of the United States. But that is the Republic of Kanjun. If you guys are curious, I will see if I can find more of it and post it in the comments if you're curious about them. Next up after that, we have the Georgia Republic. The Georgia Republic stretches from basically all of the state of Georgia down to Florida and even into parts of South Carolina and North Carolina. Same thing, not too much is known about the Georgia Republic, although they do have a pretty decent amount of great real estate, good for farming, good for agriculture. A large part of the southern half of the United States probably wasn't as scorched as much as some of the other major metropolitan areas in the United States during the Sino-American War. So one could conclude that a lot of what was already there before is maybe still intact. So that is the Georgia Republic. After that, we then get up to what is called the Boston Federation. The Boston Federation is basically just kind of the ruins of what was basically New England. There isn't really an overarching government that's overseeing all of the New England area, but it's essentially different sub-governments, such as, like, say, the Minutemen, and maybe some Brotherhood of Steel members, and potentially some other ones. If you played Fallout 4, you'll get a better idea of what I'm talking about. There's a lot of different factions that kind of operate within that sector of New England. So it's kind of like a loose group, but I guess the name itself does make sense. It's a federation. It's not really anything that is a central entity. It's more of a group of different entities put together. And then after that, kind of in the mid-northwest, near what once was Minnesota, we have the United States Enclaves. The United States Enclaves is basically a group of military personnel, scientists, and other some of them might be pre-war, I'm not exactly certain, but it's basically a group of intellectuals from the previous United States that have banded together to basically run experiments, test new technology, and they're not really looked as really being all that good. They're kind of a little eerie, you know, in a way. But that's basically the Enclaves. I chalk them up as basically U.S. scientists and military personnel that are trying to conduct experiments, because I think the idea behind them is they want to eventually, take over America again. That's essentially the gist there. And then last but not least, if we go back to the west, kind of doing a full circle here, we'll end up coming to the Great Khans. Now, the Great Khans is basically almost like a chieftain type of way. They're a group of multiple different clans and factions that banded together to form the central kind of Khanhood in a way. Not a whole lot is really known on them. If you've played Fallout New Vegas, you'll have a better idea of kind of their backstory and lore. But the Khans essentially are, in some way, I chalk them up as kind of being barbaric. They're almost like a post-nuclear biker gang, but they're like raiders and bandits and things like that, but they're a bit more organized. They're not just like one-off groups here and there, but they're kind of like scavengers, and they're very nomadic. They do move from place to place, so it's kind of along those lines. So that's the Great Khans. So looking at the map here, we can kind of get more of an idea of what the world of Fallout looks like after the nuclear Armageddon, and several years, I should say, more than several years after the bombs have fallen, so you can then see what this actually looks like in their world. So how does this translate to our world? Well, with the rising tensions between Taiwan and China, and obviously the US and China have been kind of at each other's throats as far as like a power struggle goes, you can kind of see some parallels being drawn here. Now, of course, do I think that a war is going to break out tomorrow between the two? Absolutely not. I don't even think we're anywhere close to that. In fact, it's more of a Cold War, if anything, type of deal. That's my personal opinion on it. I like to know what you guys think too, so let me know in the comments. But as far as drawing parallels and conclusions here, Fallout essentially is a great way for us to not only look at what I think need to desperately prevent to happen, but in some kind of awful way too, it kind of paints the picture of what is bound to happen, and almost what we could expect after the inevitable were to happen. But of course, I'm not certain that is actually the case, but it is just a nice kind of window to look at and be like, well, what if the Fallout universe were to happen? And here it is. Here's the map. If you guys enjoyed this video, please leave a like, comment what you think about this type of content. Do you want to see more of it? I definitely want to hear from you. If you like this content, I will try my best to create more content like this in the future, but I want to hear your feedback and I want to hear your thoughts on it. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe to this content and for more historical content in our real world as well, and we will see you in the next one.